Welcome to CASDA's webinar series, a series related to the National Autism Strategy. Thank you for registering, and we hope you enjoy today's webinar.
My name is Rebekah Kintzinger, and I am an autistic individual on the board of directors with CASDA. CASDA's vision is for all autistic Canadians and their families to have full and equitable access to the resources they need across the lifespan, where and when they need it. At CASDA, we are committed to ensuring the creation and implementation of a comprehensive national autism strategy that addresses the critical gaps in funding and policies which are preventing individuals who are autistic and their families from exercising their individual and equal rights as Canadians.
Hi, I'm Mark Whalen. I'm a board member at CASDA, and CASDA is a national organization working with leaders in the field of autism, parents, researchers, individuals with autism, people from big agencies, small agencies, to develop a national autism strategy that will make a difference in the lives of Canadians with autism. You'll see logos of our members from across the country, big and small. You'll also see a slide that have the logos of some of our key partners who, while they're not in the autism field, recognize that their work has an impact on the lives of Canadians with autism. Together, we're stronger. Together, we're louder. Together, we can make a big difference. Join CASDA. Be part of this movement that is going to create a better Canada for Canadians with autism.
I'm Leslie Peters, a board member with CASDA. On CASDA's website, the strategic plan is found in the About Us tab. CASDA represents the voice of autistic individuals, those who work with them, and those who love them. We engage federal policymakers on issues that impact individuals with autism across Canada. In the Our Work tab, you will find important resources. From 2007 onward, CASDA has worked toward a national autism strategy. Steps along the way include the Canadian Autism Partnership Project and the Blueprint for a National Autism Strategy.
Hi, I'm Debbie Irish, the chair of CASDA's Board of Directors. I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you to this year's 7th Annual Canadian Autism Leadership Summit, taking place in Ottawa on October 5th and 6th. This is a great opportunity to engage with government while a national autism strategy is being developed. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors for making this a truly remarkable event. Please register now at www.casda.ca.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for taking the time to join us. My name is Cynthia Carroll, and I'm one of the moderators today, along with my colleague, Rebekah. I'm the past chair on the board of directors here at CASDA and the executive director of Autism Nova Scotia. Before we begin our segment today, I would like to take a moment on behalf of CASDA to honor and acknowledge the Aboriginal homelands across this country where each of us live. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous people, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. We respect the longstanding relationships that Indigenous nations have had to this land and thank them as the original caretakers. It is now my pleasure to introduce our panel of senators for today's webinar called Senators at Home, Honing in on a National Autism Strategy. First up, we have Senator Jim Munson. Jim, can you give us a wave? Great. Senator Munson is best known to Canadians as a trusted journalist. He was also communications director for Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. In 2003, he was appointed to the Senate, acting as a vocal advocate for Canadians with diverse abilities. His leadership in Parliament led to the adoption of an act respecting World Autism Awareness Day and the landmark Senate report, Pay Now or Pay Later, Autism Families in Crisis. Last year, he championed the Accessible Canada Act as a sponsor of the bill in the Senate and is currently a member of the Senate Standing Committee on Social Affairs, Science, and Technology. He is also one of my inspirations in life, a valued colleague, and a dear friend. Thank you for being here with us today, Senator Munson. Next up, we have Senator Leo Housakos. Can you give us a wave, Senator Housakos? Thank you. Senator Housakos is deeply involved in his community, including various philanthropic efforts. He has been a long advocate for the development of a national strategy focused on autism and is the co-founder and chair of Children's First, a fundraising effort benefiting families of autism in the Montreal area. Senator Housakos was appointed to the Senate of Canada in 2008 by the Right Honourable Stephen Harper and has a wealth of experience he brings to the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
I would now like to introduce Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard. Senator Bernard is the first African Nova Scotian woman to be appointed to the Senate of Canada, representing the province of Nova Scotia in her hometown of East Preston. Senator Bernard champions issues impacting African Canadians and people living with disabilities. She is particularly invested in human rights, employment equity, and mental health. Through her involvement in community projects, her social work career, her time with Dalhousie's School of Social Work, and now her work in the Senate, Senator Bernard has maintained a deep dedication to social justice and racial justice. Senator Bernard was appointed to the Senate in 2016 by the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau. I also know autism is close to your heart and appreciate you participating in today's discussion. Thank you, Senator. Last but not least, a native of Kitchener, Ontario, is Senator Peter Boehm. Senator Boehm was appointed to the Senate of Canada in October 2018. As a former Foreign Service officer, he has served as Ambassador to Germany, Minister at the Embassy of Canada to the United States, as well as Ambassador to the Organization of American States, among other foreign postings. He is a former Deputy Minister of International Development, Senior Associate Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Assistant Deputy Minister for the Americas, North America, and Consular Affairs. He served several prime ministers as their personal representative, or Sherpa, for the G8 and G7 summits, as well as for the summits of the Americas and nuclear security summits. Most recently, he was the Deputy Minister and personal representative of the Prime Minister for the G7 summit held in Quebec in June 2018. Welcome, Senator, and I look forward to your valuable insight and your perspective on this important issue.
I'm honored to be here with my colleagues. When I got to the Senate in 2008, of course, Senator Munson was already a pioneer and a leader when it comes to advocating for autism and people facing disabilities. I was honored to follow in his footsteps, and of course now the advocacy grows, and as we've seen now the addition of Senator Bernard and Senator Boehm, and the movement is getting only stronger. What do we need in a national autism strategy? I think everyone is well aware that autism is a challenge facing a wide spectrum of challenges. There's also opportunities as well for people in the autism community and the country at large. I believe that when it comes to education, we need to continue to do more, even though a lot has been done. When it comes to research, I think it's only at the tip of the iceberg. We need to spend more on research. We certainly need to provide more and more services for young families that are facing this challenge. Of course, we know the rates are growing exponentially year after year. When it comes to service, when it comes also to the most important element, and what I really want to talk about when it comes to employment. At the end of the day, we look at the rates of unemployed adult people facing autism, and they're as high in some cases as 85%. I find that to be unacceptable. And if a society like ours is truly going to reach our true potential, we can't leave anybody behind. And the truth of the matter is I've had the privilege of working with children of autism who continue to develop and to grow. And many of them develop at their own speed without a doubt, but they have gifts and talents. And when they're put to use in our private sector, when they put to use in job opportunities, they've proven time and time again to have great success. So I believe my colleagues are going to touch upon a number of the challenges I highlighted now. My focus is really on employment opportunities, job creations. I know CASDA has a wonderful program which you've put in place in conjunction with the federal government, which is ready, willing, and able. I know there's a number of HR firms that have become that specialized and they're sort of catering and developing opportunities for autistic adults in the job sector. I'm particularly proud also of Polaris Initiative here in Montreal, which is being run by Giant Steps and Wager Adult Education Center and with TAC and in conjunction with George Weston Corporation. I believe these are just some of the first steps that I'd like to focus on in the next decade, 2 decades, where we can make people in the private sector understand. And it can't be just government-initiated programs and advocates like ourselves. People in the private sector, and I take that upon myself to talk to the banking industry, manufacturing sectors, others like Weston, to make them understand that there's a labor shortage in this country. We saw it pre-COVID. We continue to have economic challenges, but these are not people that are looking for charity. These are people that can contribute to businesses, to the workforce. They've proven it. We know that, of course, Walgreens, a major initiative in the United States, has been a huge success now for over a decade. And they're not doing it, like I said, out of charity. They're doing it because it was a business opportunity. They've hired thousands of disabled people and people with autism. And the end result is a better bottom line, better employees, better results, less absenteeism, a higher rate when it comes to work environment and building team spirit. So look, I'm passionate about that. I can go on for hours and hours. So, but I believe it's an element that we need to zero in and focus in on.
Thank you so much for that, Senator. And yeah, great comments. And I so appreciate your passion and can relate to it. Did anyone else want to jump in and build on that? Any other comments?
Well, you're very passionate, Leo, and what we have here today are passionate senators. And I really feel good about that, because we have been building up this tremendous alliance in the Senate of Canada. If there's one thing we can agree upon in the Senate of Canada, that is working in the autism community on an equal basis. And your question was, you're taking a look at what is taking place. What we need right now is the federal government at the table. We have so many people who are at the table. The federal government has been at a chair at the table on some occasions, but not a real partner. And that's what this partnership is all about. I will talk about later about what I see as success down the road. But at the present moment, if there's no better time than now. We may be at home doing what we're doing, but we're all seeing each other virtually. And now more than ever, is there a need for a national autism strategy?
Thank you, Senator.
So thank you. My question here, the next one is, how will the strategy help Canadian families? And I'm wondering if Senator Bernard can get to that question.
Thank you very much. And these, I think, questions and answers will all interconnect with each other in some way. Really appreciated Senator Housakos' passion around this as well. And the reminder from Senator Munson that we do need federal government at the table. I believe that your own vision mission really says it all and says it well. For full and equitable access across a lifespan, when and where people in this country with autism need it. And that's vital. When I think about, Senator Munson, you might want to mute yourself.
Yeah, sorry.
You're distracting me. We can have fun too. As passionate as we are, we can have fun. When I think about families in this country, and I think about the diversity that we have in this country, and the reality is, we are a very diverse country. But when I think about a national strategy impacting families where and when they need it, I think about the need for no matter where families on the spectrum live, whether it's in Newfoundland or Northwest Territories or Nova Scotia, that they have access to the resources that they need when they need them. And I've been thinking about that now more than ever, in the midst of this pandemic. I've been really quite worried when I think about the diversity even amongst families. I think about single parent families. I think about families with multiple children, maybe multiple children that have autism. I think about the children whose lives have been totally disrupted because there's no longer structure in school, when school has been out for months now. And the value of routine and structure is no longer there. I worry about the families who don't have the supports they need, even to get through a crisis like the one that we're in the middle of right now. I believe that a national strategy will help us make sure that the resources are available to the families at the time that they need them, whoever they may be and wherever they may be. Someone reached out to me recently and said that they now live in Alberta. They're native Nova Scotian, but they moved to Alberta because they could get better services for dealing with autism. That's fundamentally wrong. That shouldn't be happening in this country. Families shouldn't have to make those kinds of sacrifices. And of course, the reality is we know that many families could not make those kinds of sacrifices. And so what do? You linger in the province where you're living, and you're not able to access the resources or the supports you need. And therefore, you're not meeting your potential. Therefore, you won't get to those opportunities in terms of employment or opportunities in terms of education. And you know, we know, from your work over the years, we know that early intervention is so critical. So having that early intervention, having services across the lifespan, having services across the country, having services in both official languages and also in Indigenous languages. So people should be able to get services in the languages that they need, that they're speaking, and supports available to them when they need them.
I think you're amazing. I think that is a well-rounded answer, and I appreciate that so much. Is there anyone else that would like to answer that question as well?
I'd like to jump in if I may. First of all, to thank you, Cynthia and Rebekah, for the invitation to do this, and I'm delighted to be with three excellent colleagues here. I'm not at home. I have to make that confession. I'm actually at my office because I was told I was using up too much broadband at home. So that said, I will continue. Look, I'm a parent of an autistic son. He tends to be on the lower end of the spectrum. I don't know if anyone read Ian Brown's piece in the Globe and Mail a couple of weeks ago. It was very, very touching. His son is even further down than our son is in terms of being on the spectrum. In a time of coronavirus, autistic people are particularly vulnerable. They, in many instances, do not understand social distancing. They don't know why their routines have been disrupted. Routines are very, very important to them. So this, I think, is a big concern that we cannot lose track of. Where I see a potential silver lining, and I'm picking up here what Senator Housakos and Senator Bernard both had said in terms of looking ahead, is that our bureaucracy at the federal level and at provincial levels is being tested in a way that it's never been tested before. And there are constant communications between the federal government, the various departments. Of course, it's health, it's ESDC, potentially on the jobs front, with their provincial counterparts. So one of the things in your in the action plan, or looking ahead on the roadmap, was in fact to ensure that there are conversations between officials taking place across the country. This is something to build on, because these conversations are taking place now. And there have been many in terms of the federal government's response and working with the province to ensure that the most vulnerable are captured. So I wanted to follow up on Senator Bernard's. We call each other by our first names. It's a good thing. Follow up on the comment that was made in that looking ahead, we have to make sure that the most vulnerable are covered. So these could also be individuals who are autistic, or who have parents who do not have English or French or an Indigenous language as their first language. They could be newcomers to Canada and might not even understand the diagnostic elements even before you get into ABA or adaptations of other kinds as the child gets older. So I think that we're on a good path there, potentially, to take advantage of that. I also think there's another, we call it the other place, the House of Commons. There are a lot of MPs who are quite engaged. I think particularly of Mike Lake from Edmonton, who has devoted so much of his life and his career to this. So we should compare notes and move forward and present views and be as supportive as we can. And maybe I'll just stop there for now.
I was thinking what Peter was just saying, or Senator Boehm. Housing at this particular time, homes at this particular time during the pandemic, it's disastrous what has taken place in nursing homes. The forgotten souls in all of this argument are those with autism and other intellectual disabilities who are living in similar environments. And as Peter was talking about, these discussions are taking place between health ministers, social ministers, and so on. So I come back to my argument of no better time than right now. Because if you're talking about champions and talking about frontline people today, I'm thinking of a number of homes I've been in across this country over the last many years, where you have one-on-one behavior therapist working with an individual, and it's tough in there. And there's so much commitment. And so when you're talking about moving forward, when you're talking about taking nursing homes and not cramming four people to one room with one bathroom, we're talking about the same issues that may be taking place and are taking place in some places across the country, where it may be too small and not enough room for people to move around and to have appropriate services. Now more than ever, we talk about training of people who are in the autism field. Not that long ago, we were going to the United States to have people being trained. Well, people are being trained here. And so the idea of education and training and paying people the proper amount of money to make sure that we have people who are working in the autism community are staying in those homes, larger homes, more modern homes, and more homes that are receptive to people who have autism. I think that kind of discussion, if you're talking today with COVID-19, then the same discussion has to take place when we're dealing with autism.
Thank you, Senator Munson.
Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful. So, you know, we can see how COVID-19 is really kind of really shifted and again brought to light some of the areas that we're focused on around priority areas for individuals and families on the spectrum, and how it further complicates the landscape in so many ways. So with that in mind, and we're thinking about like how would a national autism strategy take shape? And considering now under COVID-19 and the conversation that we started to have around that, what process needs to happen next, right? So how do you see that kind of unfolding in the day, in the year, 2 years ahead? And I'm wondering, Senator Boehm, if you could take the lead on that one.
Sure. I think, as I mentioned before, there has to be some sustained pressure and advocacy, and we're seeing evidence of that right now. Broadening the base, as I recall in the election campaign, all political parties were committed to a national autism strategy. So it's a matter of holding them to it. There's another way as well, and as a former bureaucrat, I know this. It's trying to talk to people within the system, and not everyone, of course, will talk to you. But I think chiefs of staff, ministers, and policy advisors, we recognize ministers are busy. They're talking to each other. But the point I made before too about provinces and territories, it's not just the ministers that are talking to each other. It is officials who do this. This is their bread and butter, and in their own way, they are experts in the field, because they might be talking to technical experts, and they know how to get legislation made. And of course, budgetary elements. So that means talking to people at the Department of Finance, if not the minister himself, then others. And we really have to mount a campaign in that regard. So it's a bit of a no holds barred approach if we can do that. And I think it would also be very useful to look at what has happened in other jurisdictions, not just in Canada. and of course it is different provincially, but some of the best practices from other countries. I lived in Germany, and we lived in Germany for 4 years with our son, and we were using the system there, including diagnostics and everything. We had some incredible successes and some spectacular failures, and I think it's worth looking at what other countries have done as well.
Those are great points. Did anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, if I may, like I said earlier, COVID-19 is certainly presenting some unique challenges, and it's creating isolation right across this country, and particularly people that are dealing with autism have a particular challenge as well in their families. So I think the federal government, and I agree, has to step up, and Senator Boehm is right, and do more. Also in terms of coordinating with the provinces, with municipal governments, with various other industrial, and I go back to my point, economic leaders in certain parts of the country to sit down to figure out opportunities, like I said, in COVID. There's many sectors right now in the industry that are suffering major labor shortages. Doesn't matter if it's the agricultural industry, the restaurant industry, which in Montreal is such a big part of our economy, and we're very well known about it. Many restaurateurs are having such a difficulty and a challenge hiring employees. And other than making small adjustments, which at the beginning are not very costly in terms of training adults with autism to come in, there's many of those jobs that not only can they do effectively well, in many instances adults with autism can do many of those jobs in a far superior manner than the mainstream population. So I don't have all the answers, but I think people like ourselves have to reach out, in addition to the advocacy we do with the various levels of government, like I said, is shaking the cage in industry and sensitizing people that there's opportunities for them.
And just very briefly, if I could, as a former reporter, 35 years in that business, I love asking questions. So today on this webinar, I like to challenge national reporters. 1 in 5 Canadians, 1 in 5, 20% have a disability, many of whom are on the spectrum. Ask the question to the Prime Minister. Ask the question to the Health Minister. Ask the question to all ministers responsible for those with intellectual disabilities or any disability, particularly as Leo has just mentioned during this time. Ask the question, are you prepared now? You have the national blueprint in front of you. And that's what it is. It's a blueprint. It's a roadmap. It's not the panacea of everything, but everything is there. And when you're picking up that phone, as Peter has said, put this into the conversation and have this talk. I really challenge the reporters to do that. I just noticed Wanda, Senator Bernard, and somebody just jumped into the screen, so I'll give the screen to her. But that's my challenge.
Senator Bernard, over to you.
Let me jump in. Peter mentioned earlier that he's a parent of a son with autism. I'm grandmother of a grandson who has autism, and he just bounced into the room because he needs something, and that's fine. It is what it is. A couple of points I want to make around this. First of all, I think we always, I think, should be approaching this work with an intersectional lens. So always being mindful of how different people will be impacted differently around these issues. And COVID is really, I think, highlighting for us where a lot of the cracks are. And we really must make sure that we're filling those gaps, that we're addressing those gaps, that we're naming those gaps. Wonderful intervention, Jim, around media. So thinking about COVID, how much are we really raising awareness around how children and families and adults who are dealing with autism are impacted? Just thinking about, Peter mentioned internet access, accessibility, and there are so many families, first of all, that don't even have access to the technology. Maybe all of that technology that their family members were using was in the school systems, and now they're not in school anymore. And so, and people in rural areas who don't have the broadband width, So all of these things I think are important issues for us to be addressing. And I think COVID presents a particular opportunity for us to be just that much more aware of the urgency. When I think about that report that Jim referenced earlier, Pay Now or Pay Later, that's as significant today, I think, as it was when you released that report over 10 years ago. So it's important that we pay attention to these issues, bring awareness to these issues, and address them now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bernard.
Rebekah and I are tag teaming there. Back to you, Rebekah.
Let's think about goals and success and what success would look like 5 years down the road. And Senator Munson, what do you think?
Success to me, 5 years down the road, no more waiting lines for diagnosis anywhere in this country. If you have a health issue, if you have a cancer scare, you're not really lining up to get treated. You are going to get treated, and most times than not, you'll get treated where you live. The waiting lines, as we all know in the autism community, and those who may be just entering and taking a look at us today, the lineups are still huge. Provincial governments have done an awful lot, but they're still long. And there's that crucial 2-year period that once you're in the line and you miss that opening, then it's your time to play catch up. I think of Suzanne Jacobson here in Ottawa, who is part of the autism movement, and her 2 grandchildren. One is doing extremely well because he was diagnosed early. The other, it's a bit more difficult, isn't it? So what I like to see with this collaboration is that when you have a feeling inside as a mom or a dad, and with your own GP, that you get that diagnosis right away. The other idea of success for me is affordability. It seems that you're getting a stent in or something happening in this country, you go into a hospital, you get it done, you walk away. We may pay a bit more in our taxes, but we're not the United States of America. We're not writing a check at the hospital door. And it seems to me with that affordability is key here. And people say, we cannot afford not to afford it. People say, well, we can't afford it. Well, yes, we can. Because it goes back to what Leo and Peter and others have been saying in terms of employment, being taxpayers, being part of the community. The sooner we get a hold of this, and the sooner diagnosis is done, then the better we are as a country. The report Pay Now or Pay Later is now 13 years old. Later is really late now. We've done step by step. But success to me is no more lineups. And then, as Wanda has said, nobody going from Nova Scotia having to go to Alberta to say, I'm going to get better services. You know, there's nothing wrong with staying home, isn't there? Staying home and being part of the fabric of your community. You don't have to go away to be successful. But if you're going to be successful and you're within the autism community and you are autistic, then let's look for 5 years from now, at least, and I'll only be 79 then. And I'll still be around, hopefully, looking at all of these issues from the outside, looking in, because I can no longer be a senator at 75. And that's why, by the way, if I can segue, I'm so happy to see all these younger people in the screen below me who will take up that challenge and see exactly what's going on, because they too will be the guardians when it comes to autism. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Munson.
If I can weigh in on that as well and just reiterate, there's no doubt I'd like to see more research from 5 years from now. I'd like to see more detection, quicker detection, more support for families, all of the above. But I would also love to see within 5 years a designated minister of disability. At the end of the day, we have ministers of middle class. We have ministers for the status of women. We have ministers for senior citizens. We have ministers for veterans. Why can't we focus in and have a distinctive minister responsible for people with disabilities who will coordinate a national autism strategy, coordinate the provinces? I understand, and we all understand, the next 5 to 10 years are going to be particularly challenging because of the economic crisis that's going to follow, unfortunately, this pandemic. So we already had difficulty over the last decade to get fair amount of resources in order to deal with this particular issue. So my hope is within 5 years, we'll have a designated national autism strategy coordinated by a minister.
Great point.
I agree with what Leo just said. And I think this has to go hand in hand with early wins. And the early wins aspect, I think, is important. So let us push hard on revamping the disability tax credit. Let us look hard at what CMHC can do on the housing front. There's no time like the better. And if a country like the United Kingdom can have a minister designated for loneliness, why cannot Canada have a minister for disabilities that will coordinate? I think too, going with the early wins will give momentum to the movement outside. I mean, what we see, and then the inside movement bureaucratically as well. Hey, we're doing something here; it's worthwhile. Let's keep pushing, and that encouragement has to be there as well. So I think getting some early wins, finding a few more would be a good thing. The last thing we want is for the government to say, or any government to say, okay, well, we're going to commission another study. We've got studies. Mm-hmm. We've got studies all over the place that we can look at. Let's see some action early on.
And the action that we're talking about here, and I think we all agree on this, and I want to acknowledge the self-advocates today in this webinar. We can talk about wins 5 years from now, but we've had many wins at the CASDA summits over the last 2 or 3 years. And what happened at the CASDA summits? We had 5, 6, 7 self-advocates in the room from all across the country. And who better than them to tell us what the needs are within the community? And so we have to have the self-advocates at the table with the government. I guarantee you, if you put the 5 self-advocates that we have met, or I have met in the last couple of years, and put them in the same room as Health Minister Hadju or the Prime Minister, that we would walk out of there with a national autism strategy within 30 minutes.
Great point. And thank you so much.
Can I just build on that?
Absolutely,
very
Senator,
quickly?
yes.
I would say that when I think about success in the next 5 years, and certainly agree with what my colleagues have said, but I would add to that in 5 years' time, I would like to see that we don't really have a primary role, that we become the secondary, and that the self-advocates are taking their place, taking their rightful place, pushing the advocacy for change, not just having a seat at the table, but being the primary voices at those tables. It will be time. It is time.
Excellent point. Thank you so much. So the next question is, what has being a champion of a national autism strategy meant to each of you? And I don't know who would like to start off with that. Senator Munson?
I've been thinking of that word champion, and to me, I look at my role as a voice. It was a lonely voice about 13 or 14 years ago, but I don't feel as lonely anymore because the champions to me are those who are on the front lines today in COVID-19, dealing with men and women in group homes. Those are the true champions. The self-advocates are the champions. But I feel that I have an opportunity, I've had an opportunity as a voice, and if you want to use the word champion. When I was a journalist, I was able to tell a story. So the transition for me from journalism to being a senator wasn't that big of a transition, because once again, it's an area in dealing with autism where I know there was a story. Not necessarily a good story, but there was a story. And I wanted to explore that. And briefly with that, I was introduced through a gentleman by the name of Andrew Kapchak on Parliament Hill, who was protesting all by himself by the Centennial Flame, help me, help my son, he has autism. And with that story, I just look at it from the perspective, in fact, I wrote down a note that it's compelling to me because telling a story, helping to make people in society aware of the lives of people living with disabilities was not a very big jump for me because for me, it's all about justice. And if I want to use it the other way around, about injustice in this country, about people who have been left behind, as we seem to move so fast through social media and all the technology and what we have and where we are. You know, there are corporations on Parliament Hill that have highly paid lobbyists doing all kinds of work. And yet in the autism community, as you remember, about 14, 15 years ago, there were different groups in the autism environment, each one coming for something. And, you know, there's nothing better than, and I don't want to be critical of government, but there's nothing better than government likes to do, is to hand out a bit of money each place and every other place to help your association along, to help you feel better about something. But when we began to speak with this one big voice, governments are listening, are really, really listening to us. Now it's, of course, time for more action. And there has been some action with previous governments. You know, under the Harper government, there was money for research chairs. There was money for a new partnership. Under other governments, there have been money there for in our health department and so on and so forth. But we've moved to this place of speaking, hopefully, with one strong voice. And I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you, Senator. Would anyone else like to comment? Oh, Senator Housakos, if you could just unmute yourself.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I'll weigh in on that question as well. Look, I've had the immense privilege of being summoned to the Senate a little over 10 years ago by Prime Minister Harper. And I've been engaged in politics for now over 35 years of my life. And I can tell you this, there was nothing more that struck me and filled, you know, made me think really hard. Many, many years ago, as a young activist in the political process, I came across a former colleague of mine who I overlapped in the Senate for a short period of time, Senator Norm Atkins. And I was a young conservative activist in the party. And, you know, he asked me, he says, "Why are you doing politics?" I said, "Well, because I'm passionate about politics and I like politics." And at one point I said, "You know, I also like people." And he looked at me and he said, "You're going to do well in this business." I said, "Why you say that?" "Because politics is all about people." He says, "All the rest," he says, "is not relevant. You're not going to get wealthy doing this. You're not going to achieve great fame, maybe infamy, but not fame." But he says, if you love people and it's about people, you're in the right place. So my advocacy for this is I've seen firsthand, like all of you have, the thousands of Canadians across this country that face the daily challenges of raising children on the spectrum. And at the end of the day, I really believe that greatness and heroism and great human success comes from adversity. So every time I come across these families, and I've been touched personally as well with autism, as many have across this country, I get inspiration from the strength that these people are able to draw from this diversity, from this challenge, and able to just rise to the occasion. So when I make a small little contribution to helping our fellow Canadians who are faced with this diversity and with this challenge, I think it's the best thing that we can do as parliamentarians. It's incumbent on us to do it. And that's why I think when we come together as society, private sector and governments and advocates, we can do great things. So I look at the challenge of autism as an opportunity for our country. I look at the stuff that are being done around the world, in Israel, for example, with their military department, where they have a particular designated department in the Israeli military of autistic people, which they've determined that through their research that they're able to provide services to the military and intelligence operations and so on and so forth that only people on the spectrum can provide. So and there's so many other areas, of course. So I look at this as an opportunity to make our country great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Housakos. I was thinking about autism, and I was just thinking that I don't really think of it as a challenge all the time. I think of it as my neurodiversity. So as you were saying that more than once, I was thinking, ooh, I wonder if I should say how I view it. So I don't really, I think of it more as my neurodiversity rather than my challenge. Anyways, we're now going to look at asking some of the questions that were forwarded by viewers in advance.
Can I jump in, Rebekah, please, before you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you mind?
Nope.
So first of all, let me just say thank you for saying that, because I think the lens we bring to this work is very, very important. And we need to always sort of focus from that strengths-based perspective, that diversity perspective.
Yeah.
And so, you know, really, I think all of us can sort of think about how we shift our language. So first of all, so in shifting the language, let me say, I don't see myself as a champion. When I joined the Senate in 2016, and I heard Senator Munson speak about autism, I immediately waited for him outside the chamber to talk with him, because a year and a half before that, my grandson was diagnosed. And when he was diagnosed, I couldn't find another person of African descent in the country to talk to. It was as though we were invisible. And part of that is stigma. And part of that is just lack of awareness about the intersectionality. So that's the lens that I try to bring to that work. And let me say this, and I want to say that I'm very grateful to all of the adults with autism who are paving the way. Because when my daughter and son-in-law and the boys attended World Autism Day on the Hill in April of 2017, and they went to the reception and they talked directly to people, they, for the first time since their son was diagnosed, they felt hopeful. And that's pretty incredible. That's an incredible gift that the community of people on the spectrum have given to my family. And I will spend every single day trying to find some way to give back so that every family has access to what they need to bring out their full potential. That's our job. That really is our job. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I was just thinking that there are a lot of chats on the chat things going by here. That's it's fascinating to see it. And it was noted here that, you know, Carla Qualtrough is a minister responsible for disability, and that's true. But if you take a look at her other portfolios, it goes something, 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 and disability. Well, it should be, if we have a minister, and she's wonderful, and she's just a special human being, it should be a minister responsible for special abilities, whatever you want to call it. We go back to the 1 in 5, 20% of the population. A full ministerial job is needed. I just noticed a couple of comments on your chat line. Thanks.
Thanks, Senator.
So it would be all right then if we did a question that was forwarded by the viewers in advance? Okay. So the question was, how will a strategy address the needs of under-recognized and under-diagnosed populations? Specifically, there are great disparities in assessment and diagnosis for women and people assigned female at birth, for Black, Indigenous, people of color, and low-income families. And how will a national autism strategy address these needs?
From my perspective, the first thing on the Indigenous level, with Indigenous children and Indigenous adults, there is not one statistic, none, zero, in this country. I mean, the CASDA has done its survey, but difficult to get numbers in the north and difficult to get numbers in all provinces. In fact, the stats that we have come from 7 provinces, and Quebec is missing in all of this. But for in terms of stats, and it's had to do with just trying to accumulate the numbers. Is very, very, very difficult to do. This, in terms of a national strategy, is where the federal government should be wholly involved. The government has a fiduciary responsibility to its Indigenous people, and to me, they haven't fulfilled that responsibility in the north. When it comes to statistics, there are statistics there on fetal alcohol syndrome, diabetes, you name it, and things are being done in that regard. But when it comes to autism, again, forgotten. That must be done. That has to be an important part. I'll leave the other sectors that you talked about, or in terms of gender, as well. But and that's a very important point for me, in terms of our Indigenous population. Get those numbers. Stats don't lie.
If I could jump in here, I would say that when I was speaking earlier about the need for an intersectional lens, such an intersectional lens to the implementation of the strategy would ensure that we're reaching those underserved populations and paying particular attention to them so we bring them in. One of the ways that I've been doing that, I'm starting small, but following last year's summit, Dr. Gillian Philiter from Autism Nova Scotia reached out to me. She's with Autism Nova Scotia in the Autism Research Center, and also with Cynthia with Autism Nova Scotia. And we're starting to develop a whole research project that will look specifically at African Nova Scotians and autism spectrum disorder. And I think that's the kind of work that needs to happen. Work, in communities, in those communities, with those communities, so that we get a fuller picture. So getting the numbers, yes, but also hearing the voices, getting a sense of those experiences. So we need both the qualitative and the quantitative data to help us make the best possible plans going forward.
I agree with Senator Bernard's comments on intersectionality. I also think as services and people are being redeployed to do different things right now in the pandemic situation, on the quantitative side, this would be an opportunity also to look at where the vulnerabilities are for those people who are autistic, those who are closest to them, because my sense, I have no data, but is that a lot of people are going to fall through the cracks because they are homeschooling, they are working on the front line in low-paying jobs. They still might have autistic people in their households of any age, and might not have access to programs or indeed anything that will support them. So this is a moment where some of this data could be undertaken by, I'm just saying, Statistics Canada, for example, but other bodies as well, and look at that in the broader context of those who are most vulnerable.
And much has been said too about comorbidity. The idea here, mental health. Much has been said about mental health during all of these press conferences, and money going into helping people in dealing with different issues, anxiety and stress. Well, can you imagine what's going on in some places in the autism community in terms of mental health? So a specific focus into mental health and autism and other intellectual disabilities. I don't think that we're really taking a serious look at the duality here of what's taking place. So in a national autism strategy that has to be branched out to make sure that we're dealing with double and sometimes triple issues: somebody's mental health, somebody's anxiety, and of course, and living each and every day with autism.
Thank you so much, Senator. So I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and I know we have few questions we wanted to get to, but I also wanted to see if we have a time for a couple of the questions that have been coming in through the chat. So I think we're going to jump to that if everyone's okay. And one of the questions that seems to be coming up quite frequently is talking a little bit about a national autism strategy versus a national disability strategy, and kind of why a national autism strategy versus a disability strategy, and wondering if you could comment on that.
Sure. Oh, sorry, Leo. If you'd like to go ahead first, go right ahead. I've been taking.
You go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, a national autism strategy, a disability strategy, it's a very, very good question, because there are many other intellectual disabilities out there, but autism is the biggest. It's the biggest in this country, affecting more than 500,000 people. And I think that through a national autism strategy, it will open the door to a bigger strategy in dealing with all kinds of intellectual disabilities. By the way, I hate the word disability. I just believe in the ability to think of doing things differently, doing the things your way. I think we got to get our heads around that a little bit. But I think that if there is such a strategy, that this is the first door to open, and other doors will open behind it.
Senator Housakos, thank you. Senator.
I agree wholeheartedly with Senator Munson, and I want to point out there is a little bit of overlap, but the reality of the matter is we're talking about very high numbers of children being born on the spectrum. And again, I don't like to look at autism as a disability. I do focus on the fact that it is people who have neurodiversity differences, and there's a different challenge. Their developmental level, of course, it ranges, and there's a wide variety of people who have different skill sets and advance them at different times. So it's just a question with the autism community of finding a national strategy that allows people to learn and develop at their pace. My view of it is I look at it as an opportunity, as I said at the beginning of this panel, both in terms of increasing the productivity of this country. I don't want to talk economics too much, but I really look at it from a perspective of one of the things that has taken the last decade is our productivity. It's been under scrutinized, and going forward, it will continue to be a major economic difficulty. And when we have such a large number of our population with skills and gifts that they can offer to society and be part of growing our economy and our society, we have to take full advantage of it.
If I may, I think a national autism strategy has to be comprehensive, and that's why making it too broad in terms of the definitional aspects is probably not a good idea. So people are autistic, and there is this moment that that occurs for many, whether you are an autistic person or you are the parent, as I am, of an autistic person, where you think, hey, this is not going to get better, and I'm going to get older, and what supports are there for me? So my son, our son, is 30 years old. We went through the whole cycle. When he was an infant, the first milestones as a toddler were being missed. You go through denial. You think, hey, we could fix this. We're smart. We'll see the right doctors, and we'll engage in ABA therapy and everything else. And then when you realize, hey, that's not working, you come to a sense of grim acceptance, and then maybe optimism that we can actually do something for him. So a strategy, you really have to have the entire life experience in mind. So it goes to not only the early intervention, which is important, but it goes to what Leo said about employment opportunities, making contributions to the economy, feeling valued as a member of Canadian society. And we can do it. We're looked at from all across the planet as being a country that gets it. You know, we've got our difficulties, but we somehow get it. And here's an opportunity for us to come up with a real strategy.
Thank you so much. Did anyone else want to comment before I turn it over to my...
Well, I just wanted to say that words matter. And I've been noticing on the chat line about the word disability, and I've heard what Rebekah has told us. So when I talk about the importance of self-advocates, of we being taught how to speak about this whole issue, I think we're still on a learning curve ourselves, no matter how much we think, how much we care. And the only way we're going to get to the essence of that is maybe not always having these conversations, but allowing into the webinar, into these chat rooms, those self-advocates who we heard last year at the CASDA Summit, those self-advocates meeting the ministers on federal and provincial levels so that we can get the words right in having this discussion. So I think that we have to be straightened up a bit ourselves because we don't always have it correct. We have a passion and we care, and we just want good things to happen, and I really hope that will happen. And I just sincerely say that in the Senate of Canada, there are the other advocates before you here today, and there are a lot more. And on the House of Commons side, there are a lot more. And together, with all of our voices moving into one strong voice, we'll get there.
Thank you, Senator Munson. I would agree. We have many strong autistic advocates who are very invested in moving forward together. Rebekah, I'd like to turn the chat over to you.
Thank you, Cynthia. And thank you, Senators, for the exciting and valuable conversations that we've had today. I also want to thank those of you in the audience who joined us and sent in questions and commented. Your participation and contribution to making this webinar a success is something that we recognize at CASDA. If we did not get to your questions, don't worry. CASDA will be releasing a frequently asked questions document at the end of the month, and we'll be posting it on our website. We are keeping a tally of all the questions that have come up during the webinar series, and answers will be available there. You will also be receiving an email from CASDA after the webinar for feedback. Please take the time to fill it out if you can. Our next webinar is coming up on May 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time and is titled Looking Forward at CASDA. This is the 5th webinar in our series and will give an update on CASDA's strategic plan, activities over the last 6 months, and future plans. We hope you can join us. Thank you again, Senators, and have a great weekend, everyone.